as we learned more about it, we started, I think, just in general, to talk more about it as a society because of the cell phones and stuff, and they're always up to our ears constantly. And so, it became a bigger issue as time went on. But if property, then the verdict's out, like I said, it hasn't been proven that they cause, suspicion that they do. And so when you stop and think about it, this is an organic substance, right? You need oxygen and a source of food for it, basically, and it'll start growing and it can take over. I've had many properties, honestly, that have had minimal mold issues to more serious mold issues, where the client felt like they had to bring a specialist in to test the particular strains of mold and all that. That was a foreclosed property that had been hanging around for a long time. That's why I said banks want to get foreclosure properties sold because they're just sitting there with stuff like that happening, mold infesting, and whatnot. So again, another take seriously, you could see the mold yourselves potentially if you're looking at a property. And I've had some clients just be okay with the seller doing some of the recommended remediation when it was more simple, it wasn't overcoming the property or whatever. But you'll have to see what because I can almost guarantee, I hate to say it, but at some point in one of your deals there's going to be some mold somewhere, and there's going to be an issue, and they'll talk about whether it's serious or not, and maybe the seller's just going to make a small concession monetary wise for the seller to, for the buyer, to clean it up after they buy it or whatever. But like I said, if it's really serious, they may want that all taken care of beforehand, and you'll just have to potentially cross that bridge when each of us comes to it. But let's talk about these last couple issues here. They give a real nice little, Geology 101 here for groundwater. If you're not at all familiar with, what we mean by that phrase, the earth, we're standing on land, and at some point on any piece of land you happen to be standing on, you're going to hit a saturation point at some depth of the ground where there's water, from that point below. And in some areas it might only, as the book explains, it might be, hundreds of feet down. And in some areas it might be a lot shorter than that, a few feet down or whatever. Or feet down, not, hundreds and hundreds. And so we care about this because when people, corporations, whoever, start doing things to the soil that contaminate the soil, so the groundwater is eventually at risk, and then we get a lot of our own water that we use as humans, from this source too. So contaminated soil, contaminated groundwater, all bad for humans. But that leads us to a talk about two last topics: underground storage tanks, because that's one of the ways that groundwater gets contaminated, and then the law that speaks to big environmental cleanups, because they asked about that. It's called CERCLA. You might have heard of it before. But let's talk about USTs for a moment. Know that they're typically called USTs because they might even use that acronym on the exam. In case they don't say underground storage tank, I want you to recognize UST as the acronym, the customarily used acronym for underground storage tank. There is a state and federal registration process for underground storage tanks, so I want you to know that. Because, think about it, if I have a tank, and it's made of metal, right? If I have a tank underground somewhere and I can't see it, unless it's registered somewhere and someone knows that it's there, how else am I going to see it? So what is typically stored in these USTs are hazardous substances of some kind, and that's the whole point, that we're storing this hazardous substance away, and safe, quote unquote, safe underground. Typical businesses that have USTs, so if you're going to broker commercial property, anything automotive, I don't care if it's a gas station to they fix cars and auto, place in that way, and they don't sell gas. Anything dealing with automotives, or they're going to have USTs. Some other common businesses: Dry cleaners, right, chemicals for the dry cleaning, funeral homes, we talked about that the other day, embalming fluid and stuff like that underground. Apparently paper mills, because there's a lot of chemicals that go into making, paper. They give you a nice list here, but what always scares me is that my food processing plants have a lot of hazardous chemicals going on there, okay? But these registering, programs, so see it's underlined on page 158, register the tank, so that's a common question, because we don't want to contaminate groundwater. And it's monitored and regulated from the installment process, maintaining it. You want to maintain it so that you don't have corrosion prevention. Because I said, they're metal tanks, so if they're not tended to properly, they could rust and whatnot, and then whatever's in them that we're trying to save from all of us is spilling out into our ground, into our soil, into the groundwater. Overspill prevention, you could just fill it too full and then it can leak out, and then just general record keeping. Know this, the next paragraph talks about the financial resources for those individuals that are signing up to have a tank and get it registered, because they want to make sure that if you have a problem, you're going to have the money to go in and cure, environmentally what's going wrong. So you think it's kind of silly to know these next little set of bullets, but we're going to do a quick problem together like we've done a couple times in class, so you won't forget this stuff. So the following tanks are exempt. So in general, what we just read above, general rule, you need to register your UST for those reasons. And here are the people or business people who would be exempt. If I have a tank, so I do mean people and business people, because some of it's like this. If I had a tank that in general holds less than 110 gallons. If it's a farm or residential tank that holds, and I like this because again, it's 1,100 now, that was one time, this is 1,100, of motor fuel, so this is fuel for cars, that's not going to be, so it's for non-commercial purposes. So it's not like I got a gas tank that I'm charging the neighbors to come up, and fill their tank up on my parcel. Tanks that store any oil or whatever for heating my property. So I've got a tank that does that, I'm exempt from federal regulation and state. Tanks above the floor in basements. So when I say it's a UST, the underground part doesn't mean just like in a basement. It literally has to be set in the dirt, right? It needs to be in the dirt. And I'm just trying to say it. This is really important. Go back to 158 with me. We're talking about tanks that store at least 10%. So that's not a lot, right, of their volume underground. So if in my basement, for some odd reason, there was an unfinished part, there was actual soil, right, and I dug a hole in that, and I set only 10% of the tank in the ground, then I would be being controlled by these laws. Because it has to literally be in the soil, at least 10% of its volume. And then the last exemption is, they don't really test that much on that, septic tanks and storing water and wastewater. Let's do this problem together here, so you won't forget this, in case you are wondering when you get this. Turn to page 166 with me. Let's do number 16 together. Yeah.
My husband knows, but he's an architect.
I know, and it's a funny problem too. It kind of always makes me laugh. So, Henry stores toxic chemical waste in a large steel tank that has only 15% of its volume underground. Jana lives far out, well, let's go through it. Okay, that's 15%, which is greater than 10, right? So, hey, he seems to be on the hook. Jana lives far out in the wilderness and has her own gas pump connected to a 1,000-gallon tank of gas buried 10 feet underground near her garage. Okay, well, that's 10% underground, buried 10 feet underground. She's underground, and that's $1,000, and she 1,000 gallons, and she uses it anyway for her own gasoline. Lou keeps 3 large tanks filled with formaldehyde and battery acid in his basement. And we got a friend named Lou, and I always tease him because I'm like, Lou, you look like somebody. Like crazy Lou. It's got formaldehyde battery acid in his basement. So which of these people are not exempt from federal regulations? Like I said to you guys, I said, the way my brain works, I'm just one of these people. But I have to say, which of these people are not exempt? So I have to say, somebody's being regulated. One person being, one of the answers are the regulated people. Who are they? I have to tell myself that. So Henry, Jana, and Lou. No, not all three of them. Because we know for a fact, Henry for sure, Lou, as crazy as he is, he doesn't have anything underground. He just has it in the basement. So we know Lou is going to kill any of these answers that he's in, getting the cat out of the bag, so to speak. But the reason that it's only Henry is because Jana, like I said, is using hers for purposes, she's using it for her own gas pump, and, she also meets otherwise exemption. So the answer is D, and I think that, cuts to the chase as to why, the basement part, I think that's the one they try to trick you on more than anything, is they're thinking that you.
So for Jana, the catch is wilderness, right? If she's living on a farm, then she's exempted.
For own use, and it's not a
It's only 1,100 gallons.
Right, plus she's under, she's for several reasons, right, but they just throw all those words in there, I think, to make us get emotional about the question. Because even the first one, they're like, he only has to, well, he makes it, right, because it's only, you only have to have 10. Right, but she lives she lives on her own land, and she has the gas pump, and like people said, that was the first thing I caught the very first time I read it. I'm like, oh, it's only 1,000 gallons. Because she's still, right, it's because she's using it. Because if you have 1,000 gallons of something, and the rule is 10% of its volume underground, well then she otherwise had the 10% of the volume under the ground. But like, was that you, Ron, that said the thing about the 1,000 gallons, that's definitely what makes her exempt. But it's also that she's using it, for herself, that she's, like you said, she's on the list, so tends to be using it for herself. So you could get, something about USTs, one of your questions about USTs, I think it's definitely a possibility of one of these few, or there'll only be a couple of few environmental questions. The circle, the last real big, potential testable thing in here is this information about the superfund. The law was enacted in 1980, and it got amended in 86. And at the time that we were in, historically speaking, there was a lot of unattended environmental, waste sites that just couldn't be ignored any longer by the federal government occurring. And so, because we hadn't even had the EEP in place very long, right? So this is, I think, 10 years after the promulgation of the Environmental Protection Agency. And so the government said, we had to do something about these sites. We cannot just leave them like this. Because corporations were, a lot of it was, big corporations mussing stuff up and not doing anything about it. So they passed the comprehensive, CERCLA stands for the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. So, right, the act was, how are we going to respond to these environmental cleanup situations? How are we then going to get compensated for it too? Who's going to compensate who for what? And who are we going, so these two go hand in hand. Who's going to be liable for the compensation of this mess? So it was originally funded with $9 billion. And the one main thing that I want you to take into the exam with you, they funded it and potentially responsible parties. They labeled, Now, this was also referred to as a strict liability law. So let's talk about those things for a minute. So what it means if something gets labeled as a strict liability law is, speaking to the liability, this is how it came down the pike in this particular situation. The federal government said, hey, you own the property right now. We passed the law, we're gonna start cleaning these sites up, you own it right now. Guess what? You're responsible for, you're the main one we're gonna look to, is outlet, as the PRP, the potentially responsible party. And they were making the present owner of that property via this strict liability theory of a law, or, having to come out of their pockets to clean up. Sure, the government, just this is an aside, the government was going in and doing it first with that $9 billion, but then charging back, right, the people who were supposed to be liable. Because obviously, the whole point of passing the law was we gotta clean up the site, right? And the government was gonna go in and do that with the money. Now, this was a very unfair law, though. And what ended up happening is the person or the entity or whatever that was coming down the pipe that they were saying, okay, we're gonna lay it on you via the strict liability. Well, what they were doing was, just a lot of them at least, just walking away from the property, mortgage and all, right? Because this was so expensive to do. So then, what did that mean? Who owned the property then? The bank. And who was now, by the strict liability law on the hook? Again, unfair, because they had nothing, for the most part, to do with it. So when it got amended in 1986, the $9 billion was gone 6 years later, and they refunded it in 1986 with $45 billion. And they created this pocket of innocent landowner immunity. And so, its purpose was to make it not such of an unfair law. You would have an argument now if the law came and looked to you as the PRP. And the bullets right here in the middle of page 160, these are, the people they were trying to protect, or what you were trying to prove. The pollution was caused by a third party. A lot of people were probably saying up front, we bought it this way, we didn't know. The property was acquired, they're kind of the same, or you could have owned it and somebody else caused it on your property, or it was acquired after, it had already happened and you didn't find out. The landowner had no actual or constructive knowledge of the damage. And we're going to talk about this in a second and flip the page. Due care was exercised when the property was purchased. And what do they mean by due care? That property owner had done this thing called an environmental site assessment. Thanks, guys. So this is real common today for commercial property owners to still do this environmental site assessment. And so the law became more fair, and it's still it's still U.S. law. And let's talk about this environmental site assessment, because this is a potential question here too. So if you are a commercial property owner, there's no law that says when we're about to roll out, but there is an organization, which they mentioned its name in here. Let's see, what was it called? The American, this is at the bottom of 161, the second to last paragraph. It's called the American Society for Testing Materials International. So this is where, folks in the U.S. are getting this guidance from. You're going to buy commercial, you should do this environmental site assessment, and it's made up of 3 phases. Phase 1, Phase 2, and Phase 3. Phase 1 is where basically it's going to be site observation of the property. What do you see that might jump out at you as environmentally suspicious? They always say, like, if you see like oil marks on the ground or something like that, like, is there UST going awry underneath there, or whatever else, it's automotive or something, and you see, that you shouldn't see those things on the ground, oil spotting and stuff like that. So you're looking at it with your eyeballs, and you're asking who you bought it, who you're buying it from. do we have any environmental concerns? If you do, you know, can you hand over any paperwork that, you know, we could go through? So phase one is any, you know, documentation, so it's site observation, and then site observation, and then, like I said, documentation exchange from seller, you know, because it's gonna be the seller, right, that knows about it. And then, if what you saw or got as pieces of info from the seller were to give them reason for you to actually test something. Phase two would be, you know, testing. Whatever specialists you needed to bring in, testing whatever the, you know, hazardous condition might be. And then phase three would be, you know, the remediation of it, mitigation or remediation. And when I worked for Sears those couple of years, you know, we did this all the time. You know, if we were selling, I often was the one that says, you guys have any paperwork, you know, that you want to turn over to us, especially when we would sell the NTVs, the National Tire Battery Stores that, you know, we were selling one of those locations. You know, back to, there's definitely environmental stuff going on there. We got USTs underground, you know, other issues. So I feel lucky, right? Anything you get a chance to actually do, you know, with your own, you know, senses. So they do ask, sometimes you might get a question about being familiar with, you know, those simple phases to the environmental site assessment. You know, you're gonna check it out, get your documentation, do any real testing. If, you know, you need to test soil, you need to bring specialists out, you need to do whatever. And then if you find a reason that your testing said, hey, something came up, we need to mitigate or remediate. So,
We had a very interesting case, the seller used this, and he walked out of the deal.
oh, really? What was it?
Yeah, it was a commercial property in Kingston, have you heard of Thousand Islands? Kingston, Ontario. The
Yeah, I have.
financial condition was fulfilled. The lender was asking for phase one and phase two,
Mhm.
and somehow, we don't know, he was not inclined to sell the property, something happened in his family, but he was bound by the contract. So when the phase one guys came in and they interviewed him because he was the owner,
Yeah.
he just told them that there was a spill, like an oil tanker, there was a spill.
Yeah.
So the property failed in phase one.
Oh, okay. And
And,
the lending then, because that's.
yeah, the lender said, you want to buy it with the condition that you will clean up if the phase two comes in, because phase two is very expensive.
Right,
You
right.
have to dig up the whole thing and they're,
Yeah, the testing could be.
yeah, even the correction is very expensive. They have to literally dig up the whole area, take the soil out, get it treated and bring the fresh soil. So that, one of the seller, he used this phase one, it was easy. Like, there was a spill, because it was a hotel, so we had a truck driver, but there was a spill here in the property, and it just killed
And you
phase
actually
one.
killed
And he
the
just
deal.
got out, yeah, he killed the deal,
Yeah.
just by that saying one sentence.
And if anyone couldn't hear what, because, you know, sometimes because your acoustics are coming straight to me, he was mentioning that, if I understood you correctly, you believe the seller really just wanted out, right? Just wanted out of the deal. And he happened, the timing and everything, to say, hey, I got this I can use, right? And said, hey, we had a spill, and when the folks were out doing phase one, they're like, well, you know, the lender, like you said, was also like, you know, they wanted to put Hari, if he were willing to move forward with the lending on the condition that he would pay for all of, you know, phase two, if something, you know, came up, but, you know, sometimes I say, you know, I'm not trying to be like Pollyanna about everything or say everything happening for a reason, blah, 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 but I believe sometimes something that otherwise might not have been good for you, right? It might look good, all nice and pretty with its pink bow and something, but I had some real good clients near and dear to me that my husband's cousin, the guy is, want to buy a property further out. I can't remember exactly what county we were in, but it was certainly rural at that point. There was farming land that was coming along with, you know, the transfer, and, you know, he'd only worked a small patch of, you know, land in Downers Grove up until this point, but was really to take the next step. And just everything kept coming back, you know, off. But they loved, you know, certain things about the property, and I just kept getting this feeling right here that it's, you know, just move on, right? You know, I had hooked them up with CO, you know, the loan was gonna be okay, but it could be a lot better in 6 months, you know, like there were like so many things going, and they finally agreed. They were so sad, it was gonna be their first, their first home, and they had a baby, they just was like, and they let it go, and a year later, it took a whole year, but it's like the dream property, like when you compare that one, to what they were getting at for basically the same price, it's like night and day, and so, you could get some environmental stuff in residential, of course, we just talked about the ones, right, at the beginning of the chapter, are the environmental stuff that could more likely come up in residential. But certainly if you're gonna broker commercial property as well, you're gonna be involved in this whole process, oftentimes. Now, like I said, we don't know how many environmental questions, the national side doesn't reveal like exactly how many, but I am certain that some of your, at least a few of your 40 questions will be couched in some of these hazardous substances and whatnot, because that was Illinois law that we basically learned regarding those substances. Now, the good news is, so tomorrow, let's just pause for a moment, we're going to do agency and contracts. And we did this for the other class the other day. Agency has 10 questions. Contracts has 18, agency has 10. So 28 of your 100 questions are based on the material for tomorrow's class. Because there are 100 national questions. And these are these two chapters of subject matters combined. This is from that, second little Roman numeral page or something, if you're getting in the book. So 28 questions make up, almost, not quite a third. So we're gonna get into all that tomorrow, but what we have left to cover today is this chapter on title transfer, and then there's a short real estate chapter right after, chapter 10 about real estate closes. And they really don't talk about much of anything different in chapter 10, but except talking about prorating things at closing and a couple math problems that come with that. So we'll get through chapter 9 here. We may have a little bit of chapter 10 to do when we come in together tomorrow morning. Now, that said, let's turn together to page 168 and talk about just that word title, that term title. This chapter is called Title Transfer, and we've talked about in our first chapter, we learned deep C, our right of disposition, and that's what we're talking about here. And then enjoyment, right, exclusion, possession, control. But what we're specifically talking about here is this right to dispose of your property, title transfer. Because I said you can dispose of it, you can sell it, you can gift it, you can lease it to somebody, you can do nothing. But if you do want to transfer your title, there are themes in here that speak to that, so that's what we're going to talk about. Now, the 1, 2, and 3 here says this. Back to the good old English language, right? You can use the term title, and you can literally mean, like, one is a very slight nuance, but you could be meaning 3 things. If somebody, for the most part, walking around using title. Say I have title to that property, right? Yeah, I'm kind of doing this. A title to that property, right? I got this, right? I've got that deep sea. I'm I push some of the flag even, I've been invested with title. And we're talking about it in this big way, right? These rights that they have. They could be talking about the actual deed to the paper, which we're going to talk about the different things that people actually call this in Illinois, but just for conversation purposes right now, we might write title up at the top, and then this is the deed. They could be talking about that. I think it's a very slight nuance between 1 and 2. Title is a way of referring to ownership. Title is, those rights, represent your bundle of legal rights. I think 1 and 2 are very similar. But a lot of times, you can see the difference. I have title to that property. I've got all these rights. But sometimes somebody might actually be talking about, let me go get my title, right? And they're going a little bit, you call it your deed too. Now, and that's what we're going to call it. We're going to call it the deed. but we mean this documents the deed that shows as evidence that you have title to the property. And tomorrow, we're gonna go over what the elements of a valid contract are. But let's go over what the elements of a valid deed are. Okay, you have to have the grantor and the grantee's name. You have to have words of conveyance. You have to have, a mention of consideration. You have to have,
Did they list the signatures separately?
It's not there.
Yeah, I said.
yeah, thanks. And you have to have your legal description. Signature. Grantor. And then our delivery, which is super important. Okay, so our elements of a valid deed. We're gonna have the names of the grantor and the name of the grantee. Now, in either case, really, but especially the grantor, if the grantor, when they purchased the property, let's just say they weren't married then, for example, right? And now they're selling it and they decided to change their name. Like you would just do kind of like a formally known as, they mentioned this in here. So I would say, you know, I didn't change my name to Baborian, but let's pretend I did, you know, and I would say Michelle Sledge, or Michelle Baborian, formerly known as Michelle Sledge, because the deeds in the Cook County Recorder's database show me as Sledge having bought it, right? And now that I'm not her anymore, they still want to continue this very particular, exact, accurate, you know, paper trail for everybody. So you would make an account for that, but you've got both their names on it. They say that you should have the address as well of the grantee on there. I find it very common, however, like in our area here, that we'll just say, you know, so-and-so of Chicago, of, you know, of like a something, and we'll put their actual address on there. It, you know, it converts to a full physical address. The words of conveyance, it's also referred to as a recital clause. So you're gonna have some language in there, and there's so many options, but that, you know, I grant and convey, you know, there's gonna be a verb there that says, I, so-and-so, and that do this, right, to this person. I'm gonna grant and convey, so this recital of conveyance. And we'll go over a couple different options that are on the table, because it really depends on what kind of deed you're gonna go with, that you choose what words, you know, are kind of used as the words of conveyance. But there's gotta be a verb in there of like to convey, right, or to grant. You know, there's gotta be some kind of action verb in there. Consideration. Now, we're gonna talk about this tomorrow as well. And the folks in my 5-week class, you also haven't had the chapter 14 and 15, and we talked about a lease there with the other class, and I said, hey, a lease is just another contract. And in every contract, you have this thing called consideration. So they heard us talk about consideration. But this is what consideration is. Consideration in just any general contract is something of value. It's real general. It's usually money, but it's something of value that induces the parties to move forward with the contract or everything they have to do. I'll give you an example. So in a real estate deal, when people put down their earnest money on the contract, that's a form of consideration that buyer put down, because it says, this is something of value, and it's showing you, seller, that I'm willing to go through with what else we need to, right? The duties and, you know, anything that's still open as an action item or a duty for one of the parties under the contract. Your money on the table, your consideration, because that's what it is, on the table, is sitting there saying, hey, go do what you need to do, or this money might be up for grabs. It's a very big bucket in law, what consideration is. It's used on a deed in a slightly different form. So I wanted to tell you what it was, and we'll even talk about it more tomorrow. Like, you can't talk about contracts without talking about consideration. In Illinois, who decided this at what point, I don't know, but we never put the actual purchase price on the face of the deed. Instead, what we do is, this is what's become customary, in this need to have some kind of consideration down on the table, so to speak, we always put in this phrase, for $10 and other good and valuable consideration. And the other good and valuable consideration is the rest of the purchase price. But the rest of the class is going to do the transfer taxes today. I did the transfer taxes with the other group on Friday. You can always find out what the last selling price of a purchase of a property was by going in, pulling down the deed, looking at the transfer tax stamps that are on it. We're going to go over that in a couple of minutes. Because at every transfer, you got to pay a tax to actually transfer the property. And it's based on the purchase price. So you can see how much transfer tax was paid and then back into the purchase price. So we'll do, but for the time being, let's just get through this list here. What we put right on the face of the deed is for $10 and other good and valuable consideration. But we've at least listed that there's some consideration involved here. Now, I mentioned this the other day, but it might have only been to, half of the class. The legal description appears on the face of the deed for a very important reason, because there could be a mistake with the address, right? That's easier to do with a PIN number. I said every property is going to have the legal description. Of course, it has an address. I mean, that we commonly refer to it as, but it also has that PIN number. I'm just saying it could be easy to make a typo on the PIN, or there's no requirement that the address 2447 North Ashland actually would be on the deed. But I'm just saying, as long as you got that legal description on there, it's gonna nail out or mark out the perimeters of the property. So at the end of the day, this description would always trump, because you couldn't because they're a little bit longer, take up at least 4 or 5 lines usually, if less like we were making a big mistake on all that. And now, these are the two that get tested on again and again and again. You need the name of the grantor, you need the name of the grantee. You're going to want to make a paper trail of what the grantor had another name. They say put the address of the grantee on the deed. We've got to have a verb, right, to say I'm giving it to you, I'm selling it to you, I'm conveying it to you. You're going to have this consideration, description. But if the deed isn't signed by the grantor and delivered to the buyer, nothing else matters. It has to be signed, and then the grantee doesn't sign anywhere on the deed. Don't let them trick you with that question on the test. The person that's buying it, the grantee, they don't sign a deed at all. It's only the grantor. So I should do that. Sometimes I forget, right? If you're brand new, right? I said the or people are giving, right? This is the seller. He's giving title away that day. I mean, for a price, right? Giving title away. And the grantee is the receiver. He's receiving title that day. So that's the buyer. It could be in a life estate, but let's just assume that for a moment. It is a requirement in Illinois. I'm gonna just travel through these next couple pages and see if there's anything else I want to add to what I've said so far. But as you look down at the bottom of 168, it is very much a true statement that the grantor must be of sound mind in Illinois. And basically it's this: if you are someone that can understand what it means to transfer, right, then they would say you're allowed to do it, right? If you didn't understand what you were doing away, if you go through like a mental, exam or something like that, you understood, they would allow. But if you have been, this comes up in the contracts chapter, but I'll say it now, maybe it's there too. But however, if you have actually been decreed by the state of Illinois that you are not mentally capable of taking care of yourself, so you have it's still called an insanity judgment, then you cannot transfer property in Illinois. You have to have your legal, whoever is legally in charge of you. Usually, whether you're an adult or a child, it's still called your legal guardian. But, so sometimes they ask that. As long as you can understand what it means to transfer, you wouldn't be, if you didn't have an actual piece of paper that says you've been declared legally incompetent covenant. But if you do, then you are not allowed to transfer property in Illinois, on your own, with just your name. So on 169, I'll let you know, obviously grantee, I just said is not required to sign the deed. Know this is, I like this chapter a lot, I really do like this chapter, if you haven't read it in its entirety yet, everybody in here might have. It pulls together a lot of things that you've learned. It's letting you know right here in the deed, if you're buying with more than one person, you're gonna have to decide, were you tenants in common? Remember I said that, it's gonna say right on the deed, that when we were learning that stuff, you're gonna have to choose and say, and if you don't say, it's what then? If you buy them with more than one person, if you forget to say,
Tenants in common.
right, you're gonna be a tenant in common, right, so, but you should say, joint tenants or tenants by the entirety are your choices. Never, the real selling price is never on the deed. Here are the examples of what choices, I mean, you can even just say, you know, we grant 2 grants, you don't need to say these, convey and warrant, remise, release, alienate, convey. I mean, this isn't by law, this is just, you know, suggested wordage if you're going to use a warranty deed, if you're gonna use a special warranty deed, if you're gonna use these other types of deeds we're about to break down, so let's just wait till we get there. It would also be, I didn't put it up here, but it would also be the place where you put any exceptions and reservations, right? We talked about that. You got a fee simple determinable, you wanna sell it, fee simple subject to a condition subsequent, it better show up in the deed, because otherwise you didn't sell it that way then. If it's not in the deed, you didn't sell it that way then. Unless you said, you know, they will always say, subject to all deeds and restrictions of record. And if it were from a prior deed, the restriction, well then that would be, you know, then it would be on. It became on, because it was in the trial. Because remember that all those restrictions attach and run with the land, whether it was a private deed restriction, an easement, you know, some other type of encumbrance, even the lien, right? It attached, the monetary lien attached and ran with the land. Most people are gonna wanna make darn sure that the monetary ones are cleared up, right, before we actually don't accept delivery of that deed that day. But that's where it's gonna show up. And then signature of the grantor. That question, 99%, you'll all get that question from this chapter, that only the grantor signs the deed. It does let you know here, most states, including Illinois, will let, I can't be there, I'm out of the country for months on end, whatever, I need to sign my deed that I am, you know, going to sell a piece of property. Somebody back in the States, I gave them my power of attorney to do that. They can sign the deed for me. If they have a power of attorney that says I've given them that right, it doesn't actually have to be, right, the person who owns the property who could have given. But that's the only option for it not to be you, is if you've literally given somebody your universal power of attorney to do that. So a lot of times it comes up as a question about the acknowledgement / notarization. Basically, they mean the same thing, right? If you look up acknowledgement, it means, I have it written so small here, right? To recognize as genuine or valid. What are we recognizing as genuine or valid? Because this is what they ask. It's the signature of the person. That's what's being attested to that day. What's being attested that you are voluntarily too, right? You don't get, your notary doesn't sit there and ask you those questions usually, but certainly they're under a duty that if they believe, let's say it that way, that you are signing it involuntarily, you know, their ethical, you know, rules are on there too. But know this, it's not an Illinois requirement for this, the validity of the deed, for it to be notarized, for someone to notarize your signature and say that it's that person signing on their free will. But if you don't have it, and later you're suing somebody for something, or you're getting sued, and you have to prove, you have to prove in court that you are the property owner. If it's not notarized, you gotta bring in witnesses to show that they did mean to transfer it to you that day, right? So it's like, everybody always ends up getting it notarized, because what you have to do to prove, you know, that that person really wanted to sign their signature. So, you know, it's such an onerous thing to do. So everybody does get it notarized, but know that it's not actually essential for it to be a valid transfer, a valid deed. Now, let's talk about this delivery part, because this gets asked, like, pretty much almost a guarantee you'll get a question about this. Here's the example I always like to do. Okay, I was sitting around one day and I decided that I wanted my best friend to have a property of mine, and I created a deed for it. I told her, right, I said, I'm gonna, in this instance, you know, she's not buying it, right? I'm still gonna give the deed, I'm gonna grant it to her, I'm gonna convey it to her. And so she even knows, right, we're gonna make it that high, oh my gosh, thank you so much, I can't believe you're giving, I can't believe you're doing this, whatever. I don't have any property to give me, but, you know, so this is truly how I go. So, I've given it to her though. I tell her, I'm gonna give you the deed next time I see you, so you have it, right? I open the desk drawer and I throw it in there. And let's say she moves for some reason or something, right? It was some, you know, holiday property or something. But I never give her the deed. I never mail it to her, I never see her in person, I never give her the deed. The transfer never, ever took place. If 10 years goes by, let's say, you know, and I have reason now I need money or whatever, and I'm gonna sell the property, right? And the friend comes back to town and she starts trying to protest the sale or something, or take us to court or whatever. I mean, it got to that point. She can't sell it. I'm record owner. You never even got delivered the deed. You're not even, because record owner would mean too that she went and recorded it, right? Because when people use that phrase, you're supposed to have recorded it, right? She's not only are you not record owner, you never even finished the last most important step. And again, it's kind of true, these lists that we're making, it's almost like the most important thing is ending up on the bottom, right? The delivery of it. Now, had I delivered it into an escrow though, like let's say it's that example where she's out of the country or whatever, and you know, if she's gonna sign all her paperwork from out of the country or whatever, in escrow's okay. That the law considers that she's doing the best she could, you know, she's acknowledging it, me giving it to escrow. But this example was I just never even took it out of here, right? So I want you guys to make sure you know that. And they give a good example too. So if the other example that sometimes comes up on the test, I kept the deed in there that whole time. I made a will and I left it to somebody else too. And now, you know, the friend's like, hey, no, contesting the will or whatever, right? Hey, she gave it to me. No, you never got the deed. So it's illegally going to who I said it was supposed to be in the will because we never effected our transfer. Pardon me? Proof for acceptance? Well, you know, depending on what the hypothetical, you know, might be, if, let's just say this, if you have any reason to doubt, not so much maybe your friend that's giving you the property, but those scenarios that we just said, like maybe with the will or something, maybe God that you gave to me or whatever, it's almost like it wouldn't be a bad idea to have another witness, even if, you know, they weren't there that day you actually gave me the deed, but come back on another day, you know, get an oral, some other attestation from somebody else that could say, you know, that this person, otherwise you're in a real environment where there's a closed, you know what I mean, where there's somebody else, but it's never a bad idea if you're doing a property transfer and it is more discreet like that, you know, if it were to be a discreet transfer to have like just some witnesses to like, you know, to speak to delivery. Because otherwise I think you'd be safe if it were any kind of, you know, even bordering official, you know, like an escrow account or something who opened up, you know, an account to deposit something. You know, I think that because the way my hypo is uncommon. Do you know what I mean? So I use it to just kind of prove the point, because most people in Illinois will be closing through the title company, you know, platform. And I told you I gave that one, you know, woman that had come through the class the advice. I just said, you know, it's not even that I didn't want to help her. It was that you're opening up too much liability for yourself to not go get a title company involved and not, you know, especially somebody newbie as she was, you know. I'm just saying, because you've already shared with me, you have I transferred many properties, I'm just saying, if you said, I'm gonna look what the liens are, look what the, picked up a property, I mean, I might have a little bit of a different response, you feel comfortable doing that, that kind of thing, but I would still say, in any, if you're doing stuff outside of the norm,
Usually in the family, if you don't want to have a law or something,
right,
we can do this kind of thing, transferring the title. And not assuming, I don't know, I'm just thinking.
well, are you even thinking, like, about one family member or something, maybe saying that another family, that's what I'm saying. Honestly, it's the best advice to give, is to get one other, even if it's another person whose oral testimony, could be used to say, yeah, I mean, I was there, I wasn't even there on the day of delivery, but we went back on a subsequent day, and I confirmed that it was the intent of the.
Yeah, unknowingly, you will be taking all the liabilities too, associated with the property. If the title is transferred.
Right, thinking from an investor standpoint, hey, I got granted that property today, right? I'm a record owner, who's the tax bill gonna come to? Who's, any type of building code violations gonna come to? Who's all that's gonna come, exactly. And that was one of the reasons, I'm so glad he didn't, that prior to my brother's passing, my dad wanted to change the Torino, I told you that was 1974 Ford Torino. They got the same name, Ron Sludge, the second. He kept wanting to take it out of the same, because he kept getting ticket, and tow, and ticket, because he wasn't able to take care of the car. But my gut kept saying, he kept wanting me to change, and I'm like, no, because now we have the car, because it was legally his, but, I think if we had transferred it. I like this next section because, we didn't take the time to say on the middle of page 169, these bullets about words of conveyance. Well, let's talk about them now, but couched inside of the different choices that the grantor is gonna have to use what kind of deed they want to transfer the property with. And the three that get tested on, that last one, that bargain and sale deed, where is it here? They don't test on that one, so, yeah, the bargain and sale deed, we're not gonna go over that one. We're gonna go over the general warranty, the special warranty, and the quick claim. So those are different types of deeds that you can label your deed right at the top. You're gonna write warranty deed as the attorney that's preparing that deed. You're gonna write special warranty deed. My experience has been, when my client has gotten special warranty deeds, it was when the attorney of an REO office of a bank created that deed. And we'll tell them, and it'll make sense to you, but I tell you why somebody would give that kind of deed. But when you choose which deed you're gonna give, you, by operation of law, decided what kind of warranties you're gonna give the buyer with the type of deed you decided to give. Now, most buyers' attorneys are going to want and be in the right to demand a warranty deed. Because the warranty deed is the one that comes with the grantor, the seller, giving the most promises or the most guarantees or the most warranties. All those three words are acceptable to use. So everybody wants to get the warranty deed because the warranty deed comes with these, is it 5 or 6? I always forget. Covenants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. These 5 covenants are part of the warranty deed. They're not going to say this in the warranty deed, but by Illinois law, these 5 covenants are in a warranty deed. You've got the covenant of stays in. You've got the covenant, we've talked about this one, of quiet enjoyment. You've got the, against encumbrances and of further insurance, right? Shortcuts. The covenant against encumbrances and against, of further insurance. And then warranty forever. So the first one, the covenant of Sezen, that just, because if you look up this word, it means possession. Sezen. So it means that, yes, I truly do own it, and I truly do have the right to transfer it. The important part of what I said is, I truly do own it. Because think about it. You don't wanna be a buyer caught in a fraudulent situation where you think you're buying something from somebody who's got the legal right to sell it to you, but they don't really own it. Let's just take that example I just gave, and the friend went to try to transfer the property of the property she never came and picked the deed up from. I'm just saying, she really can't stand up there and say, I've got the covenant of Cezanne rests within me, right? Because she never really did get the, title, because I didn't deliver it to her. So you're saying I have the right to sell it to you, because you care that you're getting it from somebody that really has the right to sell it to you. The covenant of quiet enjoyment, we've gone over that several times, and it definitely speaks to, these two are kind of related. Covenant of quiet enjoyment says, or maybe I should even say it's related even more to this one. It says nobody's gonna come out of the woodwork later on and try to say, hey, I had some kind of interest or title in that property too. Nobody's gonna come bug you, because remember that's what kind of quiet enjoyment is. You get to do what you want there as long as you're not violating anybody else's covenant of quiet enjoyment. But in this sense, it's you gotta look at it with a little bit of a nuance. It's just saying the seller or the grantor is granting to the buyer. Nobody's gonna come in there and try to disturb your quiet enjoyment in that way. Come out of the woodwork and say, I got title to this place, or I got some interest in this place. So title is good. I had all the title that I needed to give to you, and nobody's gonna come. So these are two that are actually, more related in my mind. The covenant against encumbrances, it says this: except for what's on the face of that deed that you're getting today, there aren't any other encumbrances. Because I guarantee you, there's going to be some kind of encumbrance on most properties. If nothing else, the utility easements, those gross easements bringing in, the electric, the gas lines, nothing else. They'll say you're taking this property subject to all encumbrances of record. Like that is what, they'll wrap it up real nicely, because we're about to talk about what the title company does, and they're going to have produced a report saying all the encumbrances. So we know what they mean when they say all record encumbrances. Our attorney or agent, we've read them. And then this one, the covenant of further insurance under the warranty deed says, hey, if you need me to do anything else to make this deal effective, we forgot something at closing that day, whatever the case may be. They give an example here of, we've talked about this scenario a few times. If you were that deal where you had a spouse on record, but I'm sorry, you had, your spouse wasn't on record, and some people are erroneously thinking we don't need their name in, right, on the deed, on the contract, on the listing agreement, but we learned you do need their names on all those things, or signature. So if that didn't happen, and for some reason the title company missed it, which they probably wouldn't, but they did. An example of covenant of further insurances would be, I'll go get my spouse and we'll come in here and do a quick claim deed where they're waiving away all their homestead rights. Because that's the only reason you need them to sign. That's the only one little thing they have. In Illinois, it's your primary residence. You have interest. It's slight in the property. Warranty forever, and that's the cool thing about this one. It's the one that really distinguishes it from the other deeds, is that the warranties that I'm making here today via this warranty deed, I will warrant it forever. And I warrant it back to the beginning of the property. So I warrant that all this is true back to these. I may not have even owned it back there. So usually the reason that people are willing to give warranty deeds is that, there's been warranty deed after warranty deed after warranty deed. When you look back at the history of the property that has been passed on from, grantor to grantor. Because this is the most common typical deed. An attorney will expect, based on the words, if we're doing residential, right, in the contract, that this is the kind of deed that's going to come down the pipe at the end of the day. The special warranty deed is the other, like I said, definitely it's a common deed that's used, but surpasses it by far, the type of deeds that close it. The special warranty deed, like I said, my own personal experiences to share has been when we've been in a foreclosure, and the attorney for the REO bank gave my buyer a special warranty deed. Because this is what the special warranty deed warrants promises. The seller is promising to the buyer, I promise you, the first one, the covenant of Cezanne, I promise you I own it. Guarantee that the grantor received title. I got title, I own it. And a property that is not encumbered in any other way, I'll warrant the encumbrances back to from when I bought it, but not beyond that, not in this way. So the first one says, I know I'm not writing what's there, I'm not putting in my own words. I own it, and that means I can transfer it. So that's what that first one is saying. I own it so I can transfer it, and then the second one is that they're warranting that there aren't, that the property hasn't been encumbered during, during the grantor's ownership in any other way than what the, we're gonna call it title search. Title search shows. And he's warranting that. The property hasn't been encumbered during my ownership, the grantor's ownership, in any other way other than what the title search shows. And I'm warranting that to you. So you buy it today, nothing's gonna come up that's not on the title report during the time I owned it. He's not warranting these two things, or especially this one, in this warranty forever type, that's the biggest distinguishing characteristic between them, really. Because what he's saying here, really is encompassed in a couple of these other ones, but it's the time frame. This is like I'm warranting it back all the way to the beginning. I'm only warranting it during the time period I have it. So that's why the bank is saying, I'm not gonna make any promises past when it came into my ownership. He got it foreclosed on, they got foreclosed on, he's got title to it. That bank isn't gonna give me one of these. He's only gonna give me one of these because he's not gonna warrant it for anything else. And it's, I think it wouldn't be so difficult for them to do this based on what the county records show, but they're not willing to do it, the banks are, Because a lot of times the bank is selling from another state too, it might not even be located in Illinois, and they're just like, I don't want to deal with it. I'm just giving you a special warranty deed, and I'm just, going to deal with the time frame that we had in our possession. I'm not making any additional warranties. Now, the only other deed that they actually test on the exam is that quitclaim deed, and we've thrown it around a few times and together. But the quitclaim deed makes no warranties basically, except this. This is the only warranty. I warrant, I'm giving you, grantor, or grantee I mean. I, grantor, am giving you, grantee, what I have. Making no promises to what I have, because see, I promised you here, I own it, and I have the right to transfer it. I promised you here, I own it, and I have the right to transfer it. I'm not even making you that promise here. I'm just making you the promise, I'm gonna transfer you what I got. I'm not even promising you I got anything. That's on your shoulder. If you get a quitclaim deed from somebody, it is on the grantee's shoulders to go make sure that this stuff is true, that the person that you're buying it from, or that's, gifting it or whatever it to you, truly has the right. My experience has been, the only time I've used quitclaim deeds are in these couple different instances. I have family members transferring property. I told you guys this like a week ago. I had my brother's wife and mother-in-law transferring property back and forth to one another. They know each other, they trust each other, they're using a quitclaim deed. The daughter knows you're giving me what you got. I know you're not lying to me, my mom, I've also had quitclaim deeds between, you're a couple. One of you makes the mortgage look better, and one of you makes the mortgage either impossible or not look so good. So you can't go on the mortgage. So you don't go on deed that day either. So our title, at the closing, and I've had clients that come back later, and we want to add the, spouse or the partner or whatever to the deed, to the, owning the property as well. So we do a quitclaim deed. Because again, it's that same thing. I know what you got, and I know what you're giving me, right? So if you're ever buying something via quitclaim deed, it's very risky, right? Very risky. You're going to want to absolutely make sure the title searches have been done, by, you paid somebody to do it. It's probably a good, way to go, a title company to go do a title search for you before you accept somebody's quitclaim deed. I'm pretty sure Sam says this on the actual live video, because I think he can't help himself. Some of the stuff I tell you, I think it's funny, but this one, he refers to the quitclaim deed as the, go away, I never want to see you again. Because that's what he had to give his ex-wife in his
Yeah.
divorce dispute with the house that they had. Because that's another way it's used a lot, is in, marital dissolution judgments, one spouse quitclaims, the house to the other. So I think he does say that.
He does say that.
He does.
He does say that.
And Zorana and Christine, because Mariah's not here today, because she was the other one that brought it up, the day after, so right, it was a long time, because you guys brought that up the last day I saw you. All this time I've been up here saying, Sam's videos. I personally was talking about, they're both awesome, I'm not saying the other one's on, but I was saying to use as a tool his recap videos to listen to over and over. But he has the full class videos on there as well, and that, so I believe that might have been where you guys were in the videos, on the longer one. It makes sense to me, because that chapter 1, if you remember, we did chapter there, it opens up, I talked about all the different ways you can specialize in the profession and stuff. And I know at his 3.5-hour class, he certainly would go tangential, but talk about some more stuff in depth. Because I conferred with Scott, and he says, yeah, we haven't done any new videos, and so make sure for the recap ones, they're, everyone knows it's the dashboard, right, that you're going into, it gets all the, unless they've changed the way.
The shorter ones is right at the top.
It's right there, yeah.
Right, they show up before, I think it's review video, doesn't it?
It's
Right,
right.
that's what I was saying, it goes out of
Review video.
Okay,
It
it still
goes
goes
out
out.
of sync.
You can't tell what review
Right,
runs
that's what
what
I'm trying to
topic
say.
matter. That's the only thing that's kind of.
He's out of sync, and he's got like, what, a really small, and
But
he's
it's
going
big.
like.
Yeah,
Click on
it's
the
more
chapter,
then.
We don't
it's
have
right
that
at
book.
the top.
Yeah, we don't have that
I
book.
promise I will actually watch it tonight. I tried to, I was locked out. I'm like, Scott, I can't even get in online, and it took him a while to get back to me, and then, he's like, yeah, I wasn't expecting you to get kicked out like
It's
that.
never-
Like in his session 5 review, just for example, like you would think it would be our chapter 5, but his session 5 review is where he's talking about deeds and something else in it,
Okay, well, I'll physically look at it, because I'm all back in now and signed up, and, to see what the difference is between because I thought for sure that might be the difference, that it might be the long class versus, the shorter one. But that is definitely what I meant, because I do think that, I do believe, his short videos are very, let's see, what do we got here time-wise? Let's go over, you know what, if, I think this might be the best use of our time. As far as the transfer tax stuff goes, my advice people, it's a math problem, right? And so I did the math thing with the other class Friday, to show them how to do the math, it's super simple. So if you don't mind, maybe we'll do that too, and we'll do the transfer tax math. But I will tell you this much, we'll do the math together, my 5-weekers, for sure, absolutely. But the Illinois has something called the Illinois Transfer Tax Act. And literally, the first line at it says, for the privilege of transferring your property, we, the state of Illinois, will charge you a transfer tax. So it's for your privilege, I have it erased, for being able to dispose of your property. The state, the county and the state, it's nominal, it's 25 cents per $500 of purchase price and 50 cents per, so it's not a lot of tax. But it is a tax the state charges so that you can actually transfer your property. But one of the things I didn't say to the folks on Friday, see this underlined, this gets asked a lot on page 173. It says a completed declaration must accompany every deed presented to the recorder for recording. When you fill out the paperwork that accompanies how much transfer tax you're supposed to pay, you fill out, it's called the transfer tax declaration. And it used to be, it was a physical piece of paper, but like in the last, 3 years, it hasn't been that long, I'd say 3 years, they've made it online now, so it's always the title company that, the attorneys in the title company fill all that paperwork out. But for the exam, definitely know that when those folks, meaning the title company usually, eventually wanna go record the deed, if it doesn't have the declaration with it accompanying it, the deed won't be accepted for recording. So it used to be a physical piece of paper, like I said, called the transfer tax declaration, but now it's online, but they ask that all the time, the completed declaration. And it's showing how much you owe, right? It says $300 in transfer tax, or, $500 in transfer tax. So it's showing, how much you're actually being held to pay. I promised you we would get to this page, when we learned about easements by prescription. And that was where that individual was gaining a right of an easement in another person's property by continuously using it day after day after day after day without the owner's permission. We said in Illinois, it's a really long period of time, 20 years you have to be doing that. There's that element of tacking. So
And it's
you've
like a
got-
squatter?
Exactly, Troy. Now, this is the squatter's rights, and I said we get to in chapter 10. So when we learned about the easement by prescription in chapter 2, we were learning about somebody gaining, if you remember what an easement is, you should for the exam, a right to use someone else's property for a particular purpose. That's an easement. But here, in adverse possession, that's the phrase I want you to know. It's otherwise called what Troy just said, squatter's rights. But its technical legal term is called adverse, right? Because it's adverse to the seller's, wanting adverse possession. So you're not working toward just getting a right to use another person's property for a particular purpose, an easement. You're working toward, we've all learned this now, be simple. You're working toward getting their whole deep sea. And again, nothing's changed. It has to still have been done, meaning the person trying to gain the right. Open, notorious, hostile, adverse to the true owner's possession. It still has to be for the 20 years. Tacking, still, a possible way to prove your case. You've got, several people coming in saying, we've done it for so many years, and they add everybody's time up together. Whether you get the question asked to you from the easement way or this way, you'll get it one way or the other about, so know about tacking, know about the 20 years rule. At least those things are all the same. And the bullets are all the same. You had to have been doing it. And it doesn't say it here, but remember, the way you can stop it, like as a property owner, put a wrench in the stroke of the wheel, so to speak, is one of two ways. Go tell them you give them permission, because now they're not working toward taking something away from you that you haven't already given them. Or put up the no trespassing sign, send them, let's say, don't do it. So it's kind of weird, but either one works, right? Because otherwise you're just gratuitously saying, I'll let you come on the property, and I'm not giving you any right, I'm not giving you any true interest in it. There's so many tiny concepts, and not a ton of them are super testable as you move through these next few pages. But what they do here is the text offers you all these different ways in which title, we just talked about the one way, right? The very intentional way. We talked about closings and the deed and stuff. I'm choosing to show up at closing that day and, grant it to so-and-so, and we're gonna go through a formal closing. Well, I'm not gonna hit it hard with this paragraph on involuntary alienation. Alienation just means to transfer, okay, guys, to alienate means basically to transfer your property. So if you had an involuntary alienation, you really wouldn't want that, right? But some of the examples are by the government, taking it via eminent domain. You lose it through foreclosure, right? What's another example they gave you? Oh, escheat, right? I mean, that would be the state, losing it, but still. Probably didn't want that to happen, or you don't pay your taxes, right? You're gonna lose it, those are different ways. They talk about transfer of property through a will. We all know that's possible. You can, through a testamentary document, say who's gonna get your property after you die. Transfer of property after death, no will. Now, I want you to know some of this stuff. It's not super, super highly tested on, but as you can see, there's some underlying stuff, and I would say it's up for grabs, but it's a lesser percentage for sure, this stuff on page 175 that's underlined. It starts to break down, if you've never heard this before, if you are in somebody's will, and you get real property from them. You're called a devisee. And if you're in somebody's will and you get personal property from them, you're called a beneficiary. We all are familiar with that one, right? I got something from somebody, I was a beneficiary in the will. But if they specifically leave you real property, you're that fancy word called a devisee, if you know what it is. So, if you see that word on the exam, right, you see devisee, you know, hey, that's somebody that just got property through somebody's will, right? You know that right off the bat. They give you some of the rules we've gone over. There's the first bullet on 175 talks about joint tenancy, and we talked about the reason people do that is because it has that really cool right of survivorship attached to it. So when you die, the other people that own with you, they don't have to go to probate court. This is going to transfer to them by operational law. I told you that every law, every state has, wait, let me, before I say that. Yeah, know this. See where it says transfer title by will right in the middle of the page? They point out a good rule here. If you are going to transfer property to somebody while you're living, it's also called an inter vivos transfer, right? A lot of the Latin terms during my lifetime, inter vivos. You've got to transfer that by a deed. You're not transferring that property any other way than by a deed. If you're living, it has to be by a deed. That's the only document that transfers real property during somebody's lifetime. Otherwise, you can transfer it after you die via the testamentary document, right? Via the will or the living trust or whatever. But if you're alive, I want you to know that for exam, right? Don't get tricked on that. They're living, they can only transfer that by a deed. They can't really set them, it's not gonna, and then after you die, the only way you can transfer a property to somebody is through a testamentary document. You're dead, you can't sign anymore, right? And create a deed, right? That's out that way. Okay, so the other things I was gonna say is, we learned that in one of the other chapters, at least I said, hey, what I was teaching you about is cheat, and I said, every state has these acts called the Descent and Distribution Acts. And that means if you died without a will, how are we going to distribute your property to your descendants? That's where the phraseology comes from. And so, again, not like super tested on, but they go over the rules for that on the bottom of page 176. If you have children, if you don't have any children, you just have a spouse. It all goes to your spouse. You die without a will, it still all goes to your spouse if you're married. You die without a will and you have kids, spouse gets 50%, and then depending on how many kids you have, they split the other 50%. This is if you die without a will, right? That's how it states. If you die and you didn't have, so if you have a spouse or children, your stuff's going this way, right? It's going down to your descendants. If you have no spouse or children, it's going out this way to your mom and dad and your brothers and sisters or cousins that you might have. So, that's an easy thing to remember. If you got married or not married, but you got kids, it's going this way. Or you don't have kids, it's going out to mom and dad and your brothers or sisters. I want you to know this. Sam makes this one funny too. This rule in the middle of page 176. So the rule is this that they're teaching, and you get this one comes up, of everything we're going